Hi, everybody, and welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and my guest tonight is Dr. Erwin Linzner. In 1994, Dr. Lindner became affiliated with the True North Health Education Center in Santa Rosa, California. Dr. Lindner understands the importance of addressing the entire individual, physical as well as emotional, in guiding his patients in their process of healing. He incorporates soft tissue manipulation in the treatment of myofascial and connective tissue disorders and spends the time to correct joint problems in the extremities as well as in the spine. He also makes an effort to educate his patients on proper diet and lifestyle. Dr. Linzner has 22 years of experience in supervising individuals in juice or water fasting, which is a very effective way for individuals to regain their health. So please welcome to Healthy Living, Dr. Erwin Linzner. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to be with you.
You know, I've known you for 5 years, and I don't think I've ever talked to you for more than 5 minutes. And you are so brilliant when it comes
I'm
to...
hard to keep track and hold down. Yes, that's good.
Well, you know, but what's so exciting, Dr. Linzner, is what we're going to talk about tonight, and I'm not sure all our audience knows yet about these interesting topics. These are things that you're an expert in that I know nothing about, and I love learning things that I know nothing about, specifically gluten and grains and nightshades. But before we get into the meat of the conversation, I want you to tell your story about how you even got to True North, because that's fascinating. But before that, I just have to ask you about your shoes. Tell us about, you wear the most interesting shoes I've ever seen. I always think they look like pogo sticks. They've got coils. I always think you're like a kangaroo and you're going to jump up. Tell us what these shoes are and why to wear them, because I find them fascinating.
Well, they're Z-Coils, a company called Z-Coil, and if you look them up, you can find dealers everywhere. But they're designed to basically reduce impact. So when you stand, run, walk, your body has to absorb a bunch of this force that when you hit the ground, and these coils absorb a lot of it. And initially, I got them just for running because I'd run on pavement and I'd have knee pain. And by wearing the shoes, it completely took care of the knee pain from running because it absorbs enough force. So, and I like them so much, so I've been wearing them at other times as well.
Yeah, they're just the coolest looking thing. I just want to say, you're just such a kind person. You're the guy that comes around. Well, you do other things. Obviously, you're a chiropractor, True North, but you're one of the first people get to meet, because when we are fasting, I've never done water, but I've done juice. You're the first one to come in our room, 7 o'clock in the morning, take our vitals. You always have a smile on your face. You're never in a bad mood, and it's 7 in the morning. How do you do it?
Well, you know, I might as well have a good attitude, and I like helping people get healthy, and that's a real nice thing. And, you know, and that's kind of why I came to work with Dr. Goldhammer. And you asked, you know, how did I get into this?
Right, because you weren't going. It's not like you grew up wanting to be a chiropractor. You actually changed your career. So tell the story, because I think it's a great story.
Yeah, I started as an accountant, and I did odd jobs before that, of course. But I did an accountant. I worked for a moving and storage company, and I did books for them, and I really enjoyed it. It was great work. I like working with numbers. But at the end of the day, I always felt like, okay, whose life did I make better? And there wasn't really an answer. I did the books. I did what I was paid to do, but I didn't feel like I accomplished something important. And then I did computer programming as well. And again, the programs did exactly what they were designed to do, and I felt good about that. But again, whose life did I make better? And one day, and then I ran across, changing my diet and started eating better. And I ran across Dr. Goldhammer in my late 30s. I guess 35 or so. And he talked about fasting and, health and having a healthy lifestyle and getting people well by not eating, which was really an interesting concept. And so that really got me excited to say, hey, I'd like to do that kind of work. And I approached Dr. Goldhammer and said, hey, you inspired me to do this kind of work. I'd like to do it as well. And he said, great, go to chiropractic school, come call me when you graduate, and we'll work together. And sure enough, and that's what happened. So here I am.
And it's been 22 years. You must like it because you're still there and you seem to love what you do and you do it so well.
Yeah.
I love the story because I interview a lot of people like Kathleen de Maison, the author of Potatoes Not Prozac, who was the first woman to get a PhD in addictive nutrition, and she got it when she was 50. Because I want to inspire people that just it's never too late, and you didn't. It's not like you went to college to do this. You waited till you were an adult, and so I love that story. So it's so cool.
Right.
Now there's about I think about at least 3 chiropractors at True North, and you all seem to be like a little bit different. And you use this tool to me that looks like a butter knife. That to me it almost looks like a torture tool. What
it is
what
a
is
torture
it
tool.
So I haven't yet had. I'll be there in December. Maybe I'll make an appointment because I love experiencing new things. But you do something a little bit different than the other guys. So what is your specialty within the field of chiropractic medicine?
Yeah, it's part of the soft tissue rehab. People have injuries, and part of the healing process is scar tissue. And scar tissue helps the healing, reapproximate the torn tissues. It's contractile, and when the old tissues the tissues that have been injured reheal, the problem is the scar tissue remains. And if you don't do aggressive rehab and remove that scar tissue, it gives you pain and causes instability in joints. And so one of the things that I do is Graston, Graston, and these metal tools, and it looks like a butter knife, like you said.
Right.
But we kind of scrape over the tissue. We put cream on the skin to protect the skin, and it can get very red. You can have a lot of bruising, and it hurts like heck sometimes.
Right.
But, people feel a lot better when that scar tissue is gone and they have normal range of motion. And people never like the treatment, but they like the results.
Sure, it's sort of like going to the dentist. So, well, I definitely
I know. Who likes going to the dentist? Yeah.
Not me. I definitely look forward to trying that at some time. Now, when did you first change your diet? Because you have a really clean diet. I mean, of course, everybody at True North does, but yours is
right.
A little
I changed
bit cleaner.
About 27 years ago.
And what was the impetus for that? Like, because the China study hadn't been written, Forks Over Knives hadn't been out. So, when
the motivation
what
the motivation was that I was sick frequently. I had colds, like once a month or every 2 months I had a cold or a flu or something. And my energy was always poor. When I got out of bed, it would literally take me until 11 or noon before I really felt like, okay, I'm moving now and things are good. I was just fatigued. And I would sleep 8 to 10 hours and still be tired in the mornings. And I knew something wasn't right. And, I ran across a book called Fit for Life, and it kind of opened my eyes to, well, yeah, we're designed to have an optimum diet. And if you deviate significantly from it, you're going to have problems. Just like if your car is designed for unleaded and you throw in sugar or dirt or diesel, it's not going to run very well. And it's the same with humans. We have to realize there's an optimum way of eating, and all the other stuff that really tastes good is not optimum, and it causes a lot of problems. Yeah.
Right. So we should do what Jack LaLanne says: if it tastes good, spit it out.
Right. Exactly.
I'm just being tongue-in-cheek because once you neuroadapt to the taste of whole natural food, it actually tastes delicious. So
exactly, and I love my vegetables. I mean,
me too. That's what I love about True North. I don't have to feel weird for loving vegetables. What's so impressive is all you doctors at True North, you and Dr. Goldhammer, Dr. Isabeau, Dr. Clapper, Dr. Lyle. I apologize if I've missed anybody, but all you guys. Sultana, of course. All you guys are like in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. You all look like you're in your 20s. You're all fit and trim. You think the way you guys eat has anything to do with it?
Oh, yeah, and that's what we see. I mean, if you look at the old-time hygienists, which are basically people who've been eating plant-based most of their lives, or if not all of their life, and they tend to look 30 years younger. When they're 80, they still look like they're 50. And not only, obviously, looks is nice, but, how your body performs is even more important. Not being in pain and feeling good and having energy to do the things that you want to do is well worth it. And I always say, there's a price tag attached to your health. Are you willing to pay the price? Forego the short-term pleasure-seeking activity for a short period of time. It becomes much easier, and that's it. Because once you do it for 3 months, it's a whole lot easier.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of natural hygienists, the NHA magazine, they did a beautiful story on you and your family a couple months ago.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was a really, really nice piece, and that really got me interested and wanting to interview you. But really what I wanted to interview you about, because I heard you don't actually speak on the schedule at True North, but I've heard you talk about this, and I've heard patients of yours talk about this, and I know nothing about it, but the two things that I've heard you talk about is, number one, nightshades. I know what they are, but I have no idea why people should avoid them, and maybe we could talk about that first. And the second thing is all this stuff with gluten in general, or gluten specifically, and grains in general, how that they maybe aren't the most favorable of the starch category for all people. And again, we're not bashing grains, but you have some very good information about why maybe some people should minimize or avoid them. But if we can get to nightshades first, because first of all, what is a nightshade?
Well, nightshades are basically 4 major groups. I mean, they're the potatoes, tomatoes, eggplant, and tobacco's in there as well. So potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and nightshade. Those are the nightshade groups.
Well, hopefully everybody listening to this call is avoiding tobacco, so we're not going to even address that one.
Yeah.
But when you say potatoes, you mean like the white potatoes. You don't mean sweet potatoes.
Yes, the white
correct?
potatoes, not the sweet potatoes. It doesn't matter what color it is, but not the sweet potatoes. That's a different family. But even the red potatoes, the white potatoes, they're all in that family. And what these compounds do, they cause some calcific deposits, and they attach to tendons and cause joint pain. And for me, it was joint pain, and then the other problem it caused for me personally is caused like urinary inflammation. So my bladder was constantly irritated. I had to urinate every 15, 20 minutes, and it took me a few years to figure it out. I talked to doctors, nobody had a clue. And one weekend I went to a bridge tournament, and I was away from True North, and I didn't eat any nightshades, so no tomatoes, potatoes, or peppers. And lo and behold, I came back, and all that knee pain was gone, and my bladder was fine. And I go, wow, what happened? That's weird. And then I came back, and I started eating tuna, and it came right back. So I said, there's something in the food. And then I started eliminating the nightshades, which some people have problems with.
Right. And how do you know if you are a person that has problems with this? And is like, because a lot of people are like, well, prove it to me. Is there anything in the scientific literature if people want to, like, that we're not just making this up?
Right. Well, the only real way to know for sure is to eliminate them completely.
And for how long of a period do you recommend somebody do it?
Actually, for nightshades, it's fairly brief. If you get rid of the nightshades even 4 or 5 days, and then reintroduce them and eat a lot of potatoes or tomatoes or peppers or eggplant, and you'll have a reaction usually within 24, 48 hours at the most. So it's fairly quick reaction. It's a little different than gluten. Gluten takes years to recover from.
Well, it's funny because one of my very favorite meals is something I call oven roasted ratatouille, and it's made from eggplant, tomatoes, bell peppers, and a few other ingredients. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, I don't think I'm a person that has a problem with this, but I'm thinking about, oh my God, all the things I wouldn't be able to eat. Now, if somebody truly has a problem with nightshades, is it all of them, or is it possible that it's just some of them?
It's certainly possible, and I just talked to a patient today who told me, she has problems with nightshades, but tomatoes specifically give her much more problems than the other ones. So it's a very individual thing. Pardon?
Does it matter how they're cooked? So, for example, I don't think anybody would eat a raw eggplant or a raw potato, but people do cook their bell peppers and their tomatoes. So it doesn't matter how you either have it or
it doesn't matter how you prepare them. It's in the structure of the food of those particular plants that causes the calcific deposits and causes irritation. And for me, it was very interesting. For me, I would only have knee pain if I load my joints. In other words, if I'd stand on that leg, boy, did I have a sharp pain. But when I tried to pry and look for it, I couldn't reproduce it which is very strange. And I'm a chiropractor. When people
Yeah.
report pain, I can usually find it and reproduce it very quickly. I could
Right.
not reproduce this pain anywhere by palpating, no matter what I did. But as soon as I loaded my tendons, there was some sharp pain, and sometimes it would last for 48 hours and then it was gone.
Well, this is so
Yeah,
interesting, and this is something that somebody could easily do at home without really any cost, and they could test for themselves, and they could
right.
find out if they're one of these people. I wouldn't say would this be your first recommendation? I mean, if somebody's already eating a health promoting diet and having some pain, but if somebody's eating the standard American diet and is 100 pounds overweight, maybe it's not the first thing we address.
Exactly. A standard
Yeah.
American diet, like I said, nightshade problems are probably a very small percentage.
Mhm.
I'm guessing 2 to 5% at most of the population that have known allergies to them. But it's still significant enough. If you take 5% of 300 million people, that's a lot of people.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, thank you. So now on to gluten and on to grains. Now, do you personally avoid all the grains? And how do you define the grain? Because these things that are like pseudo grains, like we think of quinoa or
Yeah,
wild rice. But yeah.
quinoa is a grass, and it's not a grain. So a grain is something that has an endosperm. It has a casing, and it's basically the seed of a grass. So it has
Okay.
the starchy endosperm, and it has these proteins in them, which are really prolamines and gliadolins, which are these
Okay.
microscopic compounds. And when they come from wheat, rye, and barley, we call it gluten, which
Okay.
is rather arbitrary because there are other grains that have similar compounds with different names and lower percentages, yet we don't call them gluten. Okay.
Okay.
So, and I think probably it's just the big three, the wheat, rye, and barley, have been studied the most, and they have the highest percentages of these compounds. And
Mhm.
and as far as wheat goes, wheat especially, it has been hybridized. They've
Mhm.
used GMO, and they've got chromosomal changes where it's like 2 or 4 times the number of chromosomes than the old wheat 100 years ago that it has now. So they've hybridized it primarily because they wanted to get a higher yield per acre, and also
Ah.
having more gluten makes it easier to make breads. Becomes more sticky, and it
Mhm.
also you were able to the pesticide. I mean, it was like a pesticide. It kept off pests and fungi, so the food would last longer. So that all translated into more dollars, and so that's why the
Sure.
push came to change these. But as it turns out, these altered foods cause a tremendous amount of inflammation,
Mhm.
and it can affect any part of your body, not just the gut. I mean, the more common knowledge is that gluten does gut damage, which it does, but that's just like a microscopic. I mean, it's a small percentage of the big picture of problems that gluten causes. So that's really the issue. And so
Mhm.
these prolamines and gliadolins, for instance, wheat, it's called gliadin, and it has 60% of those proteins are this small compound. And by the way, 1 grain of wheat can have up to 17 trillion or 16 trillion of these compounds. So they're like very microscopic, maybe 36 kilodaltons, which is about 36,000 times the size of a hydrogen atom. So it's very
Mhm.
tiny.
Mhm.
And because it's so tiny, it can bypass a blood-brain barrier, and it causes excitotoxic effects.
Right. Well,
So,
it's funny because excuse me for interrupting, but when you just said that excitotoxic effect, I interview a
hmm
lot of people that aren't necessarily plant-based, but they're experts in the food addiction world. And in food
oh yeah,
addiction treatment, wheat, it's not that they don't allow grains, but wheat has never been
right,
allowed for just the reason you said.
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. And one of the things that gluten does, it also has pharmacological effects,
Mm.
which is one of the problems. In other words, and that's why people have a hard time letting it go. It's like a
Yeah.
drug. It's like taking
It
a
is.
drug.
It is. It's just I find, Dr. Linzner, that in my ultimate weight loss program, it's an abstinent based program. It's obviously plant based and based on the True North diet, but we're abstinent of all refined carbohydrates, specifically all sugars, real and fake, all flours and alcohol. And man, bread, you're like you say. I mean, people can get it about sugar, but it's like when bread, the staff of life. It's like you're right. It is a drug to people, flour and bread.
I think gluten is much more of a problem than sugar.
Mhm.
Not that sugar is good for us, but
Sure.
sugar has so many aspects to it that um, it's just mind-boggling. Um, let me mention some of the other effects. We've already mentioned excitotoxic compounds. So it goes to the brain, it excites, it causes an exciting effect. So again, there's these drug-like effect,
Mhm.
but it does damage at the same time. Wheat can also mimic other molecularly shaped because when you get gut damage, and some of these compounds leak through and they're not fully digested, the immune system can react to those compounds and not just the gliadin. So it's another type of immune-mediated damage, which is another problem. And then also, which I just mentioned, is the intestinal permeability. It changes the gut's ability to keep out polypeptides. In other words, you're only supposed to absorb very small proteins, the amino acids, which are the constituents of protein. And when these larger proteins come through, the immune system tries to protect you because it certainly could be an invader, but it just happens to be, gluten or gluten compounds.
Mhm.
So, so those are the main problems with um, gluten. And then there's also the last, but the sixth item, the way that gluten can damage your gut is non-immunological ways. In other words, by damaging the villi. For instance, there's this compound. Forgot the name real quick. It'll come back in a minute.
Mhm.
Zonulin. Zonulin is a compound that your cells actually manufacture, but when in the presence of gluten, it makes a lot more, and what that does, it creates these large pores in your gut where these proteins come through.
Mhm.
So, so those are basically the individual mechanisms that gluten can damage you. And let me go back to about the constituents a little bit more of what actually what grains have, and not just wheat, rye, and barley. Now, wheat, I said, gliadin has like 60%. Oats has another compound called avidin, which is like 16% of its makeup. Millet has a compound called panasin, which is 40%. And there's, and rice has probably one of the lowest one, and that's probably the least problematic grain. It only has 5%, and it's called orzanin. So
Mhm.
every grain has a different type of set of prolamines and gliadulins, and some people may be allergic to one only, but many people like myself seem to be allergic to all of them.
Even
And
rice, so
just
you can't eat rice even.
yes, and I'm going to try it again probably fairly soon. But in the beginning, when I eliminated just the typical three, the wheat, rye, and barley, I had a tremendous improvement in my symptoms. But
Mhm.
and then I said, well, and then I did some further research, and I found that all the grains have these compounds in them, and many people have reactions to some of those as well. So I said, okay, let's just clean it up and see if I did do better. And sure enough, I improved further. And when I accidentally had a little contamination of a little bit of rice, like I put rice vinegar one day, and boy,
Mhm.
did I have a bad night. I couldn't sleep. And then I realized it was rice vinegar. It had rice in it.
Interesting.
And
So were the symptoms you were getting from grains similar to the nightshade ones, or were they different?
no, it's completely different. I didn't mention those yet. So one of the things, I was really becoming non-functional. My brain was not working. I had
Mhm.
depression, I had insomnia, I had major memory deficits. When something would happen and like 10 seconds later, I wouldn't remember, did I do this or didn't I do that? And then 1 second later, oh yeah, I now remember, but it's like I didn't have access to information. And so my memory was really bad. I couldn't do math in my head because I couldn't manipulate two-digit numbers like 12 and 25. I just couldn't keep it in my head. And I'm good at math. I
Yeah,
have
well, you were an
all the
accountant.
science background. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is I had significant amounts of mucus all the time in my sinuses. That part I knew that might have been gluten. And I said, okay, I have mucus. I'll live with it. I didn't think that was going to be a major issue for me. I just didn't realize all these other problems were associated to gluten as well. But once I figured out that I had all these cognitive issues, I said, enough of gluten. I need to have my life back. And I've had 90% improvement in 3 years of gluten-free diet. So,
Wow.
yeah,
I appreciate you explaining a lot of the science behind this, because I remember when I came to True North as a patient in January of 2011, Doctor, it's everything, all the food is gluten-free, and Dr. Goldhammer jokes how he has to spend 4 times as much to get even the oats to be gluten-free. And I remember he just said, don't eat wheat, don't eat gluten. And I just am
right.
one of these people that's very highly compliant, and I do what I'm told, especially by people I respect. And so I stopped eating it, but I never really knew the why. So I appreciate you saying this. And I was tested negative for celiac, but I got to tell you, 3 months after not eating, bread, flour, wheat, or gluten, I had some. They have this burrito named after me in LA called the AJ burrito, and it was one of those situations where I didn't plan, and I thought, okay, I'll just have this. And I got so sick, and I know it was from the wheat tortilla because everything
Right.
else inside, the beans, the broccoli, the brown rice, were things I was eating on basically a daily basis, and it felt. I mean, it felt like I swallowed a brick, and it was
Right.
then I was like, oh boy. And so even if people can't afford to have all these blood and stool tests, like you say, these are just really easy experiments they could do at home by not eating them for a period of time and just see if they do better, because it doesn't really matter what your blood test or your allergy test says. It's the proof of, the proof of the
Exactly.
pudding, in my opinion, is in the eating. And so it doesn't matter what the doctor says or the paper says. If you feel better not eating something, don't eat it. And it's certainly worth, and it's basically free to do these at home. It's just if people can. But as we've discussed, bread and flour is such an addiction for people that most people can't go a day without it.
I know. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. And 4 or 5 years ago, I peripherally knew about gluten. I didn't research it specifically, and I knew, it was probably best. And I was telling people not to eat it, but I was still eating it. And yeah, and I was eating at True North, and then I'd go have a vegan burrito at the store next door, and boy, was that good. And I now fully understand. I fully understand when somebody says, "Oh, I don't want to give up my bread and pasta," what that is like, because it
Sure.
drives you, and people misinterpret the withdrawal from the drug-like effects that you get from it as hunger, when it really
Mm.
isn't. And I think in my experiences, people who are eating on a gluten-free diet almost never overweight. I- If you're
Interesting.
in a gluten-free diet, your weight will start coming down fairly quickly because it does drive you to eat more than you should. And it's calorically
Absolutely.
dense, and that's another issue.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, even just for weight loss, avoiding flours and sugars is a good idea, just because their caloric density is 4 to 5 times as much as the whole plant food from which they came
Yep.
from.
Right.
Yeah. Well, now you seem like you're, again, like all the doctors, they're a tall drink of water. It doesn't seem like you ever struggled with your weight, did you? Or did you get
I
trimmer
never
as you
had problems with weight. I was always right about what I am now, even when I ate a really bad diet in my 20s.
Interesting.
I ate
Mm-hmm.
liverwurst sandwiches and uh, pastrami and pizza, and I almost ate no vegetable and virtually no fruit, and it was
Sounds like,
pathetic.
yeah. Sounds like my life.
And
Your last name is the name of a famous port in Austria.
yes, of course.
It's actually quite delicious. I haven't had it in probably
It is.
30 years, but I remember it had like a raspberry jam, and it was just delicious. You're named
Yeah.
after like a dessert.
Well, I was born in Austria, and there's a Linzer tort, and that's from that town that I was raised in.
Interesting. And
For
named
sure.
after, yeah. Oh, that's really something. So that's great. So where did you learn all this, and how if somebody could, hopefully they'll listen to the call, but if they want more information on this topic,
there's lots of information out there. One of the really good books is The Dark Side of Wheat, and that I ran across that it's by Sayer Ji. Tremendous book. He's done a tremendous amount of research, and that's the one thing that convinced me, okay, I think I have to give up gluten. I'm going to try it, and lo and behold, a lot of these problems went away. And I know, and that's what we need to do. I mean, we need to research. And I thought when I was eating, plant-based, I thought I was already eating the best diet I could, but I wasn't. And so the other thing is, be careful what you believe. If you believe that you don't have anything else to learn, you can't learn anything. So always keep an open mind that maybe everything you know isn't exactly the way you think it is, So
I love that attitude. I agree with that. So did you go from your liverwurst sandwiches to the True North diet, or were there some steps in between? Because you said you typically weren't a vegetable eater when you were
once I read the book, I said, okay, I will put this to the test. I will give it a full week. And I went abruptly, and I gave it up, all of it, and I just ate rice and beans and lentils and salads and fruits for a full week. And I woke up after about 3 days. It's like I woke up in the morning, and I had energy. Wow. And it was like unbelievable. And then I said, oh, maybe there is something to this. And then I started to do more research, and then the first 6 months or 7 months, I would occasionally have some chicken, and when I did, I felt really sluggish. And then one day I said, I don't need to feel sluggish. I can give that up. Bam, and that was the end of that. And
well, how did you develop That's fantastic.
Yeah.
How did you develop a liking or a love for vegetables? Because I, like you, I didn't eat vegetables or fruit until I was 43, and I find that in my ultimate weight loss program, that's the hardest thing is to get people to develop a taste for them. And how did you develop that?
It's really a decision. You have to decide that your health is more important than anything else. And if you take that attitude and just do what you're told to do and take it on faith, that if you do the right thing for a few weeks or a month or two, that things will turn around, you won't be successful. It's when people go, yeah, I'll try it. They haven't made the decision yet. And you have to pay, like I already said, you have to pay the price to be able to go through that withdrawal period. Just like with gluten withdrawal, there's a real feeling of deprivation. And it's the same thing with animal products. You feel like, these endorphin releases you get from the high fat and high sugar foods that you get, and you miss that. And most people say they'd rather be dead than eat this way, and they will be prematurely,
Right, exactly, exactly.
Once you decide, though, this is more important, anybody can do this. And if you give yourself long enough time, you will be successful. But there are different personality types that have a lot more difficulty, and they succumb to peer pressure or family pressure, or they get stressed out, and they have a few things, and off they go, and then they have to start all over again. And it's a struggle for many, many people, but it's still worth doing.
Well, good health is, a lot of people take their health for granted, but I believe that good health has to be earned, that it's not just given to us. We have to actually do something.
That's exactly what I've been saying. There's a price you have to pay.
Right. Well, Dr. Goldhammer, Dr. Goldhammer always says that good health is a result of healthy living. Now, when you met him, I guess 30 years ago, because I love him dearly, by the way, but when I describe him to some people, they think he's kind of a bit extreme or a bit odd. Was he the same passionate kind of person back then about these subjects then?
He was already doing what he was doing when I met him. He was in his early 20s, and he was already a doctor.
Oh,
He had decided, I think age 14, I think he decided what he was going to do. And he started changing his diet and started running a business, health food business. I mean, he was just unbelievably focused at a very young age.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So you've supervised a lot of people with a fast. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's something. Have you ever done a water fast yourself?
I have. I've done maybe 5. I think 4 of them, I think, were like 5 days. I did one longer one, which was 10 days. And it's not fun. And boy, do I get weak and tired. That 10-day fast, I was like useless.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, because I've never done it, and I hope I never have to. I actually fasted one day, and I was like, oh my God, and I'm Jewish. I've never even fasted Yom Kippur, and I'm like, how do they do this? So, but I think the fact that you've done it makes it better for the fact that, because you're supervising all these patients, and then you'll have empathy, because you've actually done it. So when they tell you their complaints, you're like, yeah, I've been there, done that. So talk a little bit about this therapeutic water fasting, who should do it, and maybe a little bit about maybe juice fasting, so people know that there's different levels of True North. Like, you don't have to go there and fast. You can eat. You can be an unrestricted eater. That's what I do.
Well, now that we have a great chef on staff, people are willing to come and eat with us and exercise, which most of the time is enough to get people healthy.
Yes.
We use fasting as a more accelerated tool. Some people have significant health issues. Some people have very high blood pressure and at risk for strokes and heart attacks. And, maybe they can get it down after a year or 2 of healthy eating. But if you can do something in a 3-week fast and get your blood pressure down, you have dramatically changed your risk exposure from 2 years to 3 weeks. That's pretty impressive.
That is so cool. What kind of miracles have you seen? Like, have you ever seen a patient that was really like on death's door, that you almost felt like nothing's going to help, and then they actually recovered?
One of the most memorable ones is, I think the first year or second year when I was doing fasting supervision. This gentleman in his 40s, the cab drove him up to our facility up in Pengrove when we were still up there instead of Santa Rosa. And they drove him up, and he gets out of the cab and starts walking to the door. But I noticed he was like huffing and puffing. And I go, uh-oh, what's the story with this guy? He was in congestive heart failure. His legs were literally black. And this was not a African American. This guy was a white guy who had black legs from poor circulation, and he could barely walk 15 yards. And I said, well, what brings you here? And he said, well, this doctor referred me, and this was my last chance to get healthy, and I need you guys to help me out and get me well. I said, oh, okay.
Wow.
And I said, oh boy. And this gentleman had history of drug abuse, illegal drugs, and of course he had a horrible diet, and that's why he had all this bad circulation and had congestive heart failure. He wasn't on any more drugs, which was the good thing. So we just fed him for 4 or 5 days and got him started on fasting. He lasted about 34 days, and he couldn't fast anymore, so we broke his fast. We gave him some juice. And unbeknownst to me, I broke his fast, gave him juice, and said, take it easy. He takes off and he walks up this hill behind our facility, and he started walking 10 miles a day. And I said, what are you doing? You just came off a fast. You're not supposed to go anywhere yet. But his energy was up there. His congestive heart failure was gone. He was operating at normal levels. And he came back like a year later. And he had legal problems because of the drug abuse, and he got that taken care of. His legs continued to improve. He stayed on the diet. His skin was starting to look normal. He was starting to look grayish instead of black. And what a story. I mean, I thought this guy had very low chance of making it, and he did superbly well.
That's terrific.
We get all kinds of autoimmune conditions, lupus, rheumatoid. Those are really tough conditions, but they, when they stay on the diet and follow through and do some fasting, they do very well.
That is great. Now, okay, so in a therapeutic water-only fasting, nothing but water and complete rest.
Right.
In your juice fasting, who would be the right candidate? Because for me, it was actually, I wanted to do a water fast, but at the time I was on a medication, Dr. Sultana said, no, you can't fast, so they put me on a juice fast, which, I prefer eating, but it really wasn't all that hard. When does one decide to do a juice fast over a water fast, or do you go to True North and then the doctor actually decides what's right for you?
It all depends on your health. First of all, if you're still taking medications and they can't be phased down because of whatever reasons, you can't do water. We don't let people do water fasting on medications. So, and sometimes the medications are appropriate, and our medical doctors control those, and sometimes they can do juice fasting. And as they phase down the meds, maybe they can go to water. But the analogy I like to make is, doing water fasting is like going 100 miles an hour towards your health goal. You start back it off a little bit and you do juice only, maybe it's only 90 miles an hour. So you slowed it down a little bit, but you're still doing a lot of detox. So, depending on the person's reserves and their health and their objectives, for high blood pressure, water is the best way to go. And if they can be taken off the medication, in other words, the blood pressure has dropped low enough, then they can go on to water typically. So
that's great.
There's many different benefits that we get from water fasting. Enzymatic inductions, clearing out your arteries, lowering your blood pressure. There's losing weight, of course, reducing inflammation. So there's many different mechanisms that actually which are some of the benefits with water fasting.
But people shouldn't just fast to lose weight, correct? Because then they have to learn to eat.
Well, there's nothing wrong with fasting to lose weight, provided you learn or you've learned ahead of time or during the fast what you have to do to follow up with. If you're going to go back to your old habits, whatever benefits you're going to get from water fasting will be lost very quickly. It's not like a cure where you take a pill and now you're better and you never have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Fasting accelerates the healing process, but if you don't follow through with a diet and lifestyle, you've wasted your time, whether you've lost weight or not.
Exactly.
But,
that's the key.
But I think fasting is certainly a reasonable way to lose weight if you get your head straight about what you got to do afterwards.
Yeah,
there's nothing quicker to lose weight than water fasting.
Well, yeah, than not eating.
You don't eat? Guess what? You're going to burn a lot of fat.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
What's the longest you've ever fasted a patient at True North?
40 days.
40 days, wow.
Yeah, we have one woman that just left here again. She's done 3 40-day fasts.
Oh, my.
Yeah. So she came in with these chronic, horrible, long-standing headaches of, I think it was 16 years. And she had some head trauma, and it was unrelenting, never went away. She fasted 40 days and improved her headache 90%. So she had like 10% of it left. And she did the diet for 6 months or 8 months. And then she said, I'm doing another one because I want this headache to be gone completely. And she did another fast, and sure enough, she totally cleared up her headache. So,
and I know who you're talking about. We won't say her name. She was my roommate the first time I was there. And the reason I'm bringing this up is she was a slender person. So I want people to know that you don't have to be overweight to fast, that you can be even slender. I mean, Dr. Esselstyn has fasted. He said his bones clanged a little bit, but even he has fasted. And he's quite quite slender. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You can easily afford to lose 20% of your fat and fast. And so for most people, doing a 2-week fast is not a problem at all. Yeah, there are some really skinny people that you wouldn't want to fast 14 days. But the vast majority of people that come in can easily do 7 to 14 or even a 3-week fast without it being a major problem.
Are there any contraindications? contraindications of fasting? Because I would imagine somebody with true anorexia nervosa, they probably wouldn't be a candidate.
Yeah, we've not done particularly well with eating disordered people. I mean, you can use fasting as a tool to get them to eat better for a while, but you're not going to fix the underlying problem with eating disorder. So they're not good candidates for fasting, in my opinion, anyway. But
right.
the true contraindications are kidney failure. Once your kidney's in failure, you can't send more toxins to the kidneys. It's already overwhelmed, so that wouldn't work. Liver failure, and being on medications, and fear.
Right.
Some people are afraid of it.
But thyroid medication is one medication that you can, I believe, fast if you're on. Is that not correct?
Thyroid medication is simply a replacement of a natural hormone your body's making.
Right.
So,
do you think all the things we talked about with gluten, do you think, because there just seems, I was reading on Medscape that the number one most prescribed drug in the world isn't statins or Viagra, but it's thyroid medication, and we seem to be seeing so much more thyroid disease, particularly hypothyroidism, even in the plant-based community. Do you think it's possible that all this stuff about gluten could have anything to do with it?
Oh, yes. Thyroiditis is one of the condition that's been linked. There's about 200 different conditions, and I haven't even mentioned them. So let me just mention a few of them. And thyroid conditions, hypothyroid and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, are definitely been linked to gluten. Of course, celiac disease is the big one. And it's kind of the tip of the iceberg. I mean, once you have celiac disease, you're way down the slope on gluten problem or sensitivity. But psychological disorders, like people who are bipolar, schizophrenia, suicidal ideation, Alzheimer's, those have all been people that did better once you get them off gluten. Neuropathy. I was reviewing some videos by various gluten doctors in preparation for my talk today, and I was listening to this one doctor, and he said there was one case where they had 25 people in wheelchairs that could no longer walk. They put them all on a gluten-free diet, and 24 out of 25 within 2 months were walking normally. Now, there's some major neurologic deficits. So remember, gluten causes inflammation of the brain. And, that's how your legs work. The brain controls it, and the motor neurons control your muscles. So if those get inflamed and damaged, you can't use them. Autoimmune conditions, I'm going to mention a few of those: rheumatoid, lupus, MS, asthma. And I had a new patient today that came in for just chiropractic treatment, and she's got asthma, and she's known enough to get off gluten. She's some other things we had to do, but that's getting to be common knowledge that if you have asthma, you can't afford to eat gluten. And then diabetes type 2, both type 1 and 2 have been linked to gluten intolerance. Obesity.
That is so great.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, once your satiety mechanisms get messed up by this pharmacological effect of gluten, you're going to eat way more you should. Okay. Then the converse of that, you get people who are like atrophied and undernourished, and it's because their damage to their gut has been so severe they cannot digest food properly, and so they're underweight. And so for those people, they have to get off gluten so they can gain weight.
But you just said something that... Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, I'll ask my question when you're done. Go ahead.
Okay. The other one is osteoporosis. I just discovered that fairly recently, and there's some people that are suggesting osteoporosis is a big gluten problem as well. It's damaging your bone. Some of the research I saw even years ago was, of course, animal protein. People who eat animal protein have much higher incidence of hip fractures, but there may be something to it that even osteoporosis is significantly increased with gluten sensitivity. Go ahead. What was your question?
It's just you had said something about when you mucking up your satiety mechanisms, and my question is when you muck them up, for whatever reason, can they be unmucked up? I mean, can you ever restore them to their natural? Okay.
Your
how long?
satiety mechanisms work totally fine if you get on a whole natural plant-based gluten-free diet.
Right. And that,
because
could you talk about a little bit more what that is?
It's not that exciting that you can overwhelm your ability to say no. I mean, once you fill up that stomach with fruits and vegetables, okay, I've had enough. You just can't eat anymore. And it's only when you eat, animal products, processed foods, gluten, sugar, chemicals that stimulate your brain to say eat more. By the way, I mean, spices can be certainly fairly benign, but if you're overweight and you're eating a plant-based diet, if you add spices, you're going to eat more than you should, and that will affect your satiety somewhat.
When you say spices, are you talking about salt or all spices?
No, I'm just talking like cumin, anything that stimulate herbs that stimulate and provide a little bit of flavor. If you get a little bit more flavor on your taste buds, it's going to be a pleasurable experience, and you're going to be able to eat more. So
that's true. That's true.
For some people who are underweight, that could be a benefit. Somebody has a trouble getting enough calories in, using a few stimulating spices like curry maybe allows them to eat more, and they can build up a little bit more.
That's an interesting point that I never thought about, and you're right. And salt is like the perfect example, because people just don't want to believe that it's bad for you, because so many people in the plant-based world are like, no, that's not the problem. But again, my take is always from food addiction and weight loss, and I find that I don't particularly care for salt, and I avoid it. But obviously, I travel, and there are times I get it. When my food is salted, I eat exponentially more food. That's just the way it is.
Yes, it is. And there you go. Salt is a big stimulant, and salt's a big negative. I mean, it causes fluid retention. It's been implicated in autoimmune diseases. It raises your blood pressure. It has been shown to increase heart size, so you get cardiomegaly, independent of elevated blood pressure. So when you use salt, and even if you have normal blood pressure, there's a link to the salt can increase the size of your heart. Wow. That I thought was very interesting.
Wow. Now, there's one, I don't know if you know this story, but I love it so much, and if you know it, maybe you could tell it. If not, I'll interview Dr. Goldhammer again. But I remember there was one patient that was dropped off there by family members because it was cheaper than a nursing home. Do you know that story? Because I just think it's such a great story.
Yes. Is that the lady that stayed? Is that the lady that stayed for a year, or is that another story?
Yeah, I don't know her name, but apparently living in Santa Rosa is not cheap, and the family, this lady I guess was obese and on many medications and could barely walk, and they dropped her off there not necessarily to get well or anything, just because it was the prices at True North are so reasonable. Can you tell a little bit about what happened quite by accident to this lady?
Well, this lady again, she was tremendously overweight. She was about 270 pounds when she came in, and she was in congestive heart failure also, and she could barely walk. And, in the beginning, we tried to encourage her to just kind of do our courtyard, which isn't very far, and she could barely do that. But, we put her on, she ate our food, and she started losing weight, and she lost 100 pounds in a year, basically.
And I bet she got off her medications, too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, she about halfway through her stay, she was completely off the medication. She still had some elevated blood pressure, and she eventually did fast a little bit at the end, but not very long. She didn't like it and didn't want to, so she just went back to food. Almost all her benefits came from just eating healthy food.
Yeah.
And
I love that story. Must have shocked the heck out of her family, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, My
That
fantasy
that's
sometimes is to start an old age home where you just feed people healthy and they all wake up and they go back to their families and
that's terrific. So one of the things I don't know if you've ever listened to Healthy Living before, but one of the things I love to ask my guests is who inspired you in life. I mean, it sounds like Dr. Goldhammer had a little bit of influence on you, but it could be somebody you've never even met. But who inspired Dr. Lindner to do what he's doing, or just in life in general?
Well, I think I'm a kind of person that always was interested in the truth. I don't know where that came from, but I always want to know what the truth is. Yes.
You're an Aquarius.
I want to know what the truth is.
That's why. Yeah.
Don't sugarcoat it. Just give me the facts. What are the facts here? And that's kind of how I am. And this kind of led to what I'm doing because it, and then I found, well, when I first discovered this information for yourself, I thought, I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to tell everybody. I'm going to tell my friends and family, and going to change their lives, and nobody cared. And it was like a real shocker to me that I would just tell people, but listen, I did the research. Here, read this, read that. Just read some of the things that I've read, and it'll convince you that you should eat better. And they all looked at me and said, you're crazy. I was funny. One of the gentlemen that I worked with in those days, I sent like 20 letters about, this was about John Robbins' book, Diet for New America. And I sent these little bullet points, maybe 7 or 8, and I sent it to people and said, you need to look at this. And nobody called me or anything, so I called this guy and I said, well, I sent you this letter. What do you think? And it was eating plant-based and saving the planet because all the resources and the water we save and we live longer and we can avoid cancer, heart disease, diabetes. And he said, oh, that's all very interesting. He said, but it doesn't apply to me. And I almost fell over from my chair and I said, oh, he's exempt from all the laws of nature. So when he gets his heart disease or heart attacks or cancer later on in life, he'll wonder what he'll say then. It's just amazing
hilarious.
how we rationalize that we don't have to deal with reality.
I love that. It doesn't apply to me. Well, that's hilarious. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So we just have a few minutes left. Is there anything we didn't talk about or anything you'd like to mention? Please do. I mean, you don't have a website, right? I mean, people, if they want to find you,
I don't have
no,
just a True North website, right? Yeah.
Right. And that website is truenorthhealth.com, right?
Correct. Right. So you can certainly get lots of articles on fasting and see what our program looks like. And yeah.
And if they want to see you for chiropractic, they need to come in. They don't actually have, if anyone's living in that area, you don't have to go to True North as an inpatient. You can still make an outpatient appointment too.
Oh yeah, I have an outpatient practice. More than probably 80% of the people I see are people in the area, not just patients that come to the center. So I do a lot of soft tissue rehab, which I already mentioned, and do just standard chiropractic manipulation. Yep.
Well, that sounds great. I want to come try that butter knife thing with you someday, on a day that I don't have enough pain in my life, apparently.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you have a pain deficiency, come see me. Right.
Right. And say once again the name of that book that you recommend about wheat, and that might be helpful if people read the book of The Dark Side of Wheat. Okay.
The Dark Side of Wheat.
I love the title. I haven't heard of that one, but this is great, and I love the information you shared because for 5 years I've been saying, hey, will you talk about this? And we never seem to have time to sit down or talk. And I'm going to suggest to Dr. Goldhammer to just put you up there and talk about this because people, I'll do what Dr. Goldhammer says, but there's a lot of people that if you tell them don't eat wheat, don't eat gluten, they want to know why.
Right, exactly, and we need the facts behind what we say, so it makes it real for people. Oh yeah, I guess they're not just kidding. They actually have some facts behind what they're saying. So, yeah, absolutely.
Right, and again, it doesn't mean you can give us. You can try it. I mean, I believe anybody can do anything for 30 days. But from what you're saying, that with these nightshades and gluten, if one is sensitive, they're going to know pretty quickly.
Yes, the nightshades few days. Gluten may be a week or two. You should have some improvement in a week or two if you have gluten sensitivity. It may even happen quicker, but to get full correction of all the problems can take months and years
Sure.
with gluten.
Just out of curiosity, what do you eat? Do you eat anything like wild rice or teff or amaranth or quinoa, or are you just a completely grain-free guy and even the pseudo?
I am at this point. I'm one of the articles I read was that quinoa was contaminated with gluten about 40% of the time. So I've kind of, because of that, I'm not eating grains. I'm not doing any grains whatsoever.
Right now, okay.
I'm eating sweet potatoes, squashes, lots of legumes. I'm eating more nuts than I used to, and I think that's probably okay.
Well, but you know what? Sweet potatoes are my favorite food, and I had some issues, and for 8.5 months, basically all I ate was sweet potatoes and a little bit of steamed zucchini. And yeah, it was wasn't the most exciting diet, but it was fine. I mean, sweet potatoes are the best thing in the world. So as long as we can
I love sweet potatoes. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever try different varieties though, like the Hawaiian, and the Japanese, or you kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean I do, and I try. I have about 10 different legumes that I rotate. I always have a pot of beans going at home because of my nightshade and grain-free problems. There aren't any carbs for me to eat at the center because they've got some nightshades or it has rice in it or something, or a potato. So I've always got a pot of beans going at home, and I just rotate them. Every 2 or 3 days I've started a new pot, and I'm a simpleton. I'm not a chef like you. I just put it in the pot, add water and boil.
Sure. Well, I may be a chef, but I eat very simply too, and I think that's really the key to health, happiness, longevity, and especially the weight loss and food addiction. Well, it's just been a pleasure talking to you, Dr. Lindner. I look forward to seeing you. I'll be there next month, so I'll say hello to you, and we can talk some more about this fascinating subject. So thank you so much for being here, and thank all of you.
I appreciate all the work that you're doing in educating people.
Well, thank you. I couldn't have done it without you.
Well.
Hey, I learned almost everything I learned at True North. So thank you guys for teaching me so that I could go out and teach others. So thank you all so much for listening to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious.